Hi, I'm Chip Dizard, and in this episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Andy Ivankovich. He is from Media Fusion, Upper Room Technologies, a company located in San Antonio, Texas. I talked to him about streaming, church streaming, pricing, and the whole nine. So stay tuned as you watch this interesting interview with myself and Andy. Media Fusion. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about just Media Fusion, and before we get into Media Fusion, I want to talk to you about just Upper Room Tech. Tell me how long you've been in business, and give me a brief background about the company.
Yeah, we started in 2006, and actually I was, in the corporate world working for a big company named USAA, and I was attending church at Oak Hills Church here in San Antonio, where Max Lucado preaches.
Great church.
And being a big church, we just got involved in a lot of things, and we found ourselves with a group of friends of mine developing software on the side that the church could use in small groups. And one thing led to another, with Max traveling and other folks getting out and around, he would talk about us. And next thing we know that there's a lot of churches asking, and then, our world is small, right? And next thing you know, we're going around the world and taking phone calls, and it got too busy. And so we decided to start a company, Upper Room Technologies, that my wife actually runs as the CEO, and I'm still heavily involved. But she's got the discipline, she's got the approach for operations and supporting churches. So that's our company in a nutshell, if you will.
Wow! So it was born out of a church, and for the people that are listening or watching this, and there's a lot of entrepreneurs and people in churches, and I got my start in church as well as even in the business and the blogging and things. So I totally understand that. And on your blog, it talks about in 2006, the birth of your company, and I see some of the awesome things that you've been doing here, and and as USAA, and then working with Tata Consulting, and for Andy and things like that. So that's a great thing. So I just also wanted to talk to you really about this exciting platform for churches. Tell me just the genesis behind Media Fusion. Can you hear me, Andy?
There you go now.
Okay. I just want to make sure. Tell me the genesis, the background behind Media Fusion, and how it came about.
Yeah, Media Fusion, if you look at what most churches are dealing with, right, they generate content every weekend. But, traditionally they were starting off with podcasts, and then video moved into the realm. And, what we were aiming to try to do for churches back in 2010 was just to get them off of trying to do archive media and having to spend a lot of money with bandwidth charges. And if you remember about 2009, I think it was, Vimeo came on the the world platform there, really user friendly, full HD, able to cut and paste things inside of folks' websites. And so we really began to attack that to say, look, if you paid, I think at the time it was $60 for a Vimeo Plus account, a church could upload and handle all their video without paying the $2 or $3 per gigabyte just to watch an archive video. But what we found is that most churches were still struggling with trying to have one place to upload it. We're unique. We're a niche market, right? But churches have technology needs. And so we developed this interface that allowed somebody, an administrator or a techie, to just upload their videos and organize it based on sermon series. And so that would allow them to immediately embed that into their existing website. So it was a little widget, and it took care of a lot of things that were out there at the time, which is embed codes, and it worked well. So that was the start, and we set that out to really be a low-priced offering for churches. So I think when we first launched it was $10 a month is what churches were paying for. So what they would normally cost to pay for a designer or even do podcasting, for a fraction of that, they could get their church up and running and online.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So I see that on your site. So basically, churches can sign up now for this. This is actually live, and it's ready to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And what we just did too was release a new version And about 12 months ago, we really looked at Media Fusion. We never really did a whole lot with it ever since that first installation in 2010. But we had a lot of churches that were coming on. We would have churches sign up like every other day. And then we started getting a lot of requests. And about last year, we decided to relook at it. Well, the biggest things that folks were wanting to do was, they wanted it to be more. You would hear things about, hey, can we build this into our mobile site? Can we develop an iPhone app? Can we develop a Droid app? And we started looking at this and saying, well, gosh, HTML5 came out with responsive design. Wouldn't it be great if we rebuilt the entire application with responsive design? That way churches didn't have to build a separate app. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that really was coming up was live streaming and simulated live streaming. So live streaming, obviously is pretty basic, but huge infrastructure. But there are a lot of churches that wanted all their media together. So we started looking at that, started finding out more about simulated live, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And then the design, trying to figure out how to get a better design out there for users.
Okay. And these days, I deal with a lot of churches often. And I don't know one church, maybe 10 years ago, let's say even 7 years ago when I got into even the streaming business, I don't know one church that I go to that says they don't want their stuff live. Everybody. It's almost like having maybe 15 years ago you went to church, Andy, and you didn't see people with wireless connections at church. And but now almost any church across the country you walk into is a Wi-Fi connection and not a house,
And this is a unique thing. We always talk about that churches are creating content every weekend already, so they have a process set up for that. And we saw the evolution, right, that, pre-2010, everybody was able to do podcasting. It's the easiest thing. They produce a program. All they do is somebody's recording a sermon, and a church administrator or secretary could upload that to iTunes. And we saw that happening. But when you take the experience, you got a lot of volunteers that probably know how to operate a camera, and then it just has evolved with, with Apple products, for instance, on editing software. Really easy to begin doing some short edits and clean edits. And then next thing you know, we have people producing video. Well, the next step is if you're doing all that, all you have to do now is go a little bit forward, and now you can broadcast live. Well, prior to 2010, in order to broadcast live, you were usually going down to a local TV station, which we still see a lot of churches doing. But internet connectivity, everybody with high-speed bandwidth at the homes in America, all of a sudden that opened up the whole new realm of possibilities. You have Netflix that paved the way to devices like Roku and Xbox, that all of a sudden now you can reach a 50-inch flat screen at home very easily, but it was trying to figure out, okay, how do you tap in, or how does the church tap into that pipe?
Wow. And one of the things that I guess when I read, about the company and about the other things is that you have a really affordable a price. That's one thing you all push, at least from all the information I read. Talk about just the pricing with streaming in general, because a lot of people are confused about that. A lot of churches don't understand what bandwidth is. They don't understand what gigabytes and all that stuff.
Yeah, and that was our aim. I'm a guy, we're a very open company, but I like to solve big problems. I don't like to approach things, in a I guess what's out there. Innovation, right, is what drives me. And I had a couple of patents from USAA doing some of this online capability. But when you're looking at the church, the needs are still the same. Either you're Fortune 100 or you're a small church, you still want to get stuff online because that's where you want to be. So when you're talking about the complexity, I don't think that there's ever a problem with churches in America that, let's say, had more than 1,000 or 2,000 people attending. Could they get on live? Yes. Could they build infrastructure? Yes. They had the budgets. They had the resources to be able to do that. But I think there's an estimate, Outreach talks about, that there's maybe 1,200 large churches in America, right? Everybody else, the other 300,000, are average 75. They have a bivocational pastor. And so it basically locked them out. But they had content. they have a mission, local mission they're trying to reach. So when I was doing a lot with Oak Hills, obviously we had Max Lucado, who has 100 million books in print. And he's a well-known person, great speaker, but he's been doing it for 25, 30 years. And so when Oak Hills, at a 10,000-member church or an attendee church on the weekend, to do live streaming infrastructure, it was a budget item. So the Oak Hills infrastructure, had to contemplate, you had to do one thing first, is encode, the ability to encode your video to H.264. And what we mean by that is that anytime you're connecting to the internet, you take a live video or an output from a camera or a switcher, then you're going to encode that. Well, you need an encoder. These encoders, though, even today, cost upwards of $25,000, $40,000. So an Oak Hills church with a large budget of 10,000 people, they can afford that. And then, the capability of actually streaming that. Now you run into bandwidth, and bandwidth simply is the use of your content going out and allowing anybody to access it. Well, there's a cost, and we usually talk about the cost to stream a video is it's based on gigabyte. It sounds all this strange technology, right? And you're telling a pastor gigabyte. Well, in most cases, doing streaming, especially a small church, you're going to spend $1.50 per gigabyte. And I think that if you can estimate a 75-minute sermon on standard definition, not even HD, it's going to take, $1.50 to $2 per time, of 75 minutes of somebody connected with their iPhone, a couple bucks. You times that by 100 or 200 or anybody coming in, and it becomes very expensive. So what we started to do at Media Fusion is, at Upper Room, we pulled in the guys, and there've been a lot of developers that have been with us for many years. And we said, how do we make this cheaper? Well, we attacked it in a couple of ways. When we talk about the capability of bandwidth, folks are encoding nowadays with software, which is a little bit less expensive than a server. But primarily, everybody was still having to encode through servers. And there's great companies like Digital Rapids, for instance, sells the server-based unit, $30,000 or $40,000. And so still expensive. But we started to do some research, and we found these companies. One, it's called Teradek out of Irvine, California. Mm-hmm. And as we were working with them, they have these small, tiny devices called cubes, and one's called a VU. And what they're using them for was when the NFL, a broadcast company, would go to an NFL stadium, they were able to pass these HD streams, huge streams, right, from, say, if you got this little camera that goes over the top of the stadium, that had their little encoders that wirelessly transmitted an encoded H.264 all the way back to their truck, which then they're tapping into some bigger infrastructure to broadcast it on national TV. But these little devices were running $700 or $600. They did exact same thing that these larger $25,000 and $30,000 servers do. Now, that said, you get a little bit more refinement, and just like with everything, you can do a little bit more with an expensive box. But you got to have somebody who understands network IT. You have to have staff people. It's a complex server. So when you're talking about these little devices that Teradek had, we said, wow, this kind of opens up a small church to take right out of, we see all these cameras now that are HD. GoPros are even HD, for $300. Yep. And they have output for HDMI. Well, if you take that you can plug it into these little devices, and voila, you can encode. Now, in order to encode, you got to send it up to a network somewhere that's going to distribute your video across. And that's a problem because most cases, there's been tools and techniques that folks have used. There's one called Wowza, for instance.
Yep, Wowza Media Server.
Yeah, and if you hook up to an Amazon Web Service, you can create a distribution capability, but it's not a true CDN. And what I mean by that is that it may be okay for a local destination. I mean, I have 3 or 4 people in San Antonio who wanted to connect to my church. you could probably do it with a WoW as a server.
Mm-hmm.
You go outside of that, you're going to run into all kinds of delays. So if someone's coming in from Maine or Florida, you're going to have more and more problems. So you really have to connect into these big infrastructures. And who's out there doing this? Well, you got companies like Bright Cove. You got companies like Limelight. You got companies like Alchemy. And you have to have, you still have to have big bucks to work with these guys. Mm-hmm. So see, all of them, when you're working with them, require you to sign a 2-year agreement or 1-year agreement. And
Andy, just to interrupt you, just for people that know, CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. Just for some people who didn't know that, and also want to talk to you because most of the churches I deal with and who may be listening to this may have never even heard of Akamai, may not have heard of Wowza, may have not heard of this. All they know, a lot of churches, they know 2 things: Ustream, live stream. It has ads, and maybe YouTube streaming. Tell me why churches should kind of shy away from these, or why do you feel churches should shy away from the Ustreams, the YouTubes, and all that other stuff?
I think when we look at the live streams, they do get the capability for someone to broadcast live. The problem is with the live streams and the others, as you get into more custom-based solutions, you're going to end up paying just as much as you would with a bigger CDN. They're also built for consumer-based products. And what I mean by that is that somebody who wants to film his band, a kid, right, and they're doing a concert and they want all their friends to see it on Facebook, they're going to use live stream. They're going to use some of these other systems. But when you're talking about a church that maybe has a national following, or a church that has people that are deployed to Afghanistan and they're in the Army, when you're trying to connect to a live stream, you're going to drop a lot. And so we heard a lot of that coming in from some of the churches we were working with, saying that, it's there, but it's not there yet. And really, when you look at it, you're limited in the offering. So, and then you got to set up. You still got to configure all this stuff. So you still have that volunteer or that techie. And does that help the bivocational pastor who's his sermon done, but man, now he's going to worry about this. Yeah. So we tackle this from a point of view that, okay, we have a couple of thousand churches using us right now. We started to get some peer groups together for that segment, and we started talking about them. If we were able to offer bandwidth charges at an extreme low rate, and we made it easy. And when they said easy, what do you mean? I said, well, maybe 2 clicks or 3 clicks, and you're set up. Because when you're using live stream, YouTube, or these others, you're doing a lot of movement. And so again, prior to 2010, you're going all over the place to set up basic stuff. And, can somebody figure it out? And like I said, the larger churches with budgets who have paid staff can do this all day long. Yeah. But the churches can't. So
Andy, and let me interrupt you real quick. So what you're telling me with Media Fusion, so when I'm used to doing streaming, my church, we have a TriCaster. We go out from the TriCaster. But a lot of churches can't afford a $20,000 piece of equipment, I know, $30,000, $40,000 TriCaster. And we just connect to, via the TriCaster. So what you have, and then I recommend some churches to use Wirecast. Okay, I know you heard of Wirecast. It's I'm a big Wirecast fan. But what you have is an end-to-end solution, because Teradek is that it really goes on the camera. That's what you're saying. So it's an end-to-end solution. You don't even need a computer, right?
Yeah, you don't need a computer, you don't need a server. So we call it a non-server-based encoder. And actually what I think is going to happen is that Teradek has this market locked up, but I think everybody's going to be rushing into this because there is an ease when all of a sudden you have a standalone tiny device. And you're right, it can hook up to a camera or it can hook up to a switcher. So if you're doing multi-camera shoots, you can hook this up so it's versatile.
Now tell me, because a lot of churches I talk to and who will hear this, they have a mounted camera already. So they don't have one camera. They have the cameras mounted. So Teradek works with that as well. That's what you're saying.
And what you would do is you would do your live feed out of your switcher. So if a church has a Panasonic switcher or something to where they're able to move from camera to camera, you would take that live output feed and just attach that to the Teradek as if that's where you're broadcasting to. So the Teradek allows you to, it's got one red button that you click that says go live. and it's already configured to talk to Media Fusion. So it's as simple as a click of a button. I'm not having to mess around with servers that may go down. The second thing that we like about the Teradek, and we tested this with a couple of churches, is it's mobile. These things are so small that we're talking about, if you're going to a baptism and the church wants to feed back an outside baptistry back into the main church, or broadcast it, or picnic. It's 3 inches, and so it allows the capability for them to do a lot more than you're not going to lug around a server anywhere.
Yeah, I was just talking to a gentleman the other day in Washington D.C., and he was just telling me, what car should I get? Should I get the Hoppage car? Should I get this? And I'm not a hardware guy, but I know enough about streaming where when you have a computer, you need a certain type of card to connect to your, you know what I mean? And it's just a nightmare for some people. You know what I mean? It's a nightmare.
I totally agree. So the Teradek, is a great option, and the quality is it's equal to what we see in the bigger servers. The bigger servers, though, they do use some capability, but gosh, when if I'm a church that has shied away from live streaming, there's not an argument for that anymore. Going with a Teradek device as a solution.
Okay, so I want to ask you a couple more questions because I don't want to hold you up too long, but I want to know, so with your pricing, you sell Teradeks with your bundle, or do you have to buy that separately? Tell me how a church could sign up and get that equipment.
Yeah, let's just talk a second about how we went about our pricing. So first off, we're about the church, and so we are constantly aiming at our price points. And so we looked at everybody, what they were providing, how much it was. And actually, we even scratched our heads a little bit because of how we were able to buy wholesale bandwidth and asking, why do all these bandwidth providers charge so much? And we came out at a conclusion that, we think that in most cases, a market exists and it can take advantage of consumers when there's limited options. So we negotiated a deal, a very large deal, to where we're buying hundreds of terabytes through Alchemy. That brought our price down for bandwidth. And then the next step is we had to integrate that into Media Fusion to get to that 3 clicks and you're able to broadcast point. So we took many months of working directly with them. The second thing we did work with Teradek, and we got them to do something really cool with us, is put us up as a certified reseller. So you can buy that separately. We've talked about rolling in as a package, but at the low cost, we're just saying that we can facilitate that for you. We can get it next day, but you don't have to order it from a expensive online store somewhere. So we're able to do that, and then we charge $70 a month $30 a month for the archive version, which is just getting your videos up with podcasting, same responsive design, and then to get into the live streaming capability, we had to buy several licenses for these advanced players. And so we charge an additional $30 for Media Fusion, which is a total of $60 to be able to do live streaming. Then, yes, you do have a bandwidth charge, but our bandwidth charges start as low as 25 cents per gig versus $1, $1.50 with others. And it's that heavy infrastructure of Alchemy, which is been around since '99, and they've been thought of the guys that power 1/3 of the internet. We worked out a deal directly with them to where we're tapping into their network, and then we're able, because we're buying so much terabytes, to lower the cost to where we're able to get it to that 25 cents to, I think we have a couple of packages that range up to 35 cents. But a church basically could be live streaming for $70, $75 a month versus what they're having to pay, with other places. So that was our commitment. We got that out. But, here's some pretty interesting stuff. When we got into this, you hear this concept called Simulated Live. And Simulated Live is what LifeChurch.tv does, North Point with Andy Stanley and others. But it's also churches that maybe don't have a full production team that want to do some post-production edits. And then they just want to take maybe a Saturday night service that their pastor would preach and push that out Sunday and simulate that it's the same service. They can also do 24/7 programming during the week. So you see a lot of this happening with churches. When we decided to tackle that, we found out that there is no need to charge bandwidth. because we found that with Vimeo, they allow the ability to where with your Vimeo Pro or Plus account, you have basically unlimited views of your videos. So the key was developing the advanced Alchemy player to be able to read based on a scheduled event and push the playhead based on when someone was coming to watch that video.
Got it.
Very innovative, but again, if someone doesn't want to do live streaming, but they wanted to broadcast 10 or 15 sermons like a television channel, they could easily do that now with very minimal cost.
So they can do. Can they do both, Andy?
Yeah.
They can do live and they can do simulated live as well, or they have to do one or the other.
Yeah. No, you can do both. And what we see, our player basically, and again, it's a point and click for us, is that they go and they set up a schedule. It's almost like going in and looking at a television schedule and they're saying from 7 to 8, I'm going to play this video. And it's going to ask you, is it a live video or simulated live? Mm-hmm. So if you go live, well, hey, it's going to tie to my encoder at a certain time. So better push that button when you're ready to broadcast. Or you're going to pull from a previously recorded video and you just set it up like a television schedule. Mm-hmm. And so people come in, they're able to see that. And our players, too, the way that we are dealing with Alchemy, they had servers inside of Facebook. So we were able to tap in this months as well. But now when someone's watching live, they can actually take the video from that church and embed it inside their Facebook so that anybody who's on their friends section, you could say, hey, I'm watching a very inspirational message today. This is amazing. You should join me. Goes out to all of their friends, which we know there's going to be some non-Christians or some Christians that are maybe pulled away from the church. They'll be able to click and watch it inside of Facebook live. So there's some really cool things that are out there that will help the church grow, help the church basically keep connected. And the pricing, we are aimed at it. I think we shot a bow or a bullet across the bow of the major providers that are out there. So if anything, my hope is that we're able to get the gospel message streaming all over, a lot more than what we see on the internet today. But in many cases, that maybe these other vendors will begin to lower their prices because we got Alchemy HD at 35 cents. We're selling the cheapest gas now on the four corners of a street corner. So
yeah. And this has happened. You see this happening all over. You see it happen in the mobile industry. You're going to see it happen probably in the cable internet industry. So I think that you are leading the charge with us. So Andy, I really appreciate your time. Tell me how people can get in contact with you if they're interested in your services, your website, email, and phone number.
Yeah, very easy. We built out the website to be a research website for churches. So when you go out to it's MediaFusionApp.com. You can call us at 877-878-4007. We have a full support team. We have an international team, too, that deals with overseas folks. So any of those will get to us, and we'll get them hooked up, and they'll find out how easy it is, and they could be streaming this weekend for services, within a few minutes. So.
Well, hey, that's great. Hey, I appreciate your time, and I will definitely tell some people about your app. I want to test it as well to see, and I thank you for your time and best wishes for your company and for spreading the gospel, because this is my passion, and for what you told me is your passion too.
Thank you so much. It's great meeting you, and we'll definitely stay connected, and sign up for a free account. That's the other thing. We don't, first 30 days, go out there and kick it around. We have nothing to hide, and so we built a take product, so if it works for somebody, we expect them to go run, but there's no barrier to that, so we appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for watching. If you need more information about streaming or live streaming, archive streaming, you can visit Andy's website at MediaFusionApp.com. Take care.